Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the shock system and some issues to do with the suspension on the Gelande II D90 chassis by RC4WD, because there's some important information I think would benefit some hobbyists out there. So if you're about to upgrade the shocks on your chassis, this may help you. First, I'm going to turn the chassis over and draw your attention to here. Now today's main topic is about upgrading the suspension. As most of you know, the original shocks on the D90 Gelande II are 80mm in length. For my taste, for the scale looks, that's a little bit high, so what I decided to do was lower the ride height. I decided to go for a set of old Man Emu 70mm shocks, which brings the ride height down by about 10mm. The originals were 80 and this one is 70. Just a quick note, when you mount your shocks, there are top and bottom mounting points, and they are 5mm apart. So obviously if you mount on the top hole there, your ride height would sit 5mm lower, or on the bottom one there, it's obviously going to be 5mm higher. So in this video, this assumes you are using the bottom mounting hole, and we're going to talk about the issue when you install 70mm shocks, namely the Old Man Emu ones. So let's turn the chassis over, and I want to draw your attention to the front drive shaft there. With 70mm shocks, if your suspension bottoms out, which is quite often on these systems, the drive shafts, the front one only, will bump into your transmission case. As you can see, there is a small mark there, and that is from this ear here on the drive shaft. And this is a demo of the drive shaft knocking the transmission. Here is a visual aid to help you see better or help you understand a bit more. The piece of paper is getting caught there, so there's absolutely no room, and you can actually see the drive shaft flexing as it hits the transmission. So let's have a closer look at the original plastic drive shaft. Now this is an original RC4WD drive shaft. It is half plastic and half metal. This part here is plastic, this part here is metal, this part here is plastic. These ears on the outside are plastic, but the connecting or part of the joint there is metal on the inside. These outer ears are used solely to hold in a pin, and you could probably see the pin there. If these plastic ears snap, the pin has a chance of falling out. My original plan was to run these until they snapped, and then I would have a personal experience of how much abuse these can take. But unfortunately, due to that knocking, I now have to change them or do something about it. And I'm going to share with you what you can do to prevent the drive shaft knocking into your transmission if you've lowered the suspension. And solution number one, and probably the most obvious, is if you don't want that knocking, you could stay with the original 80mm shock length. RC4WD and many other manufacturers make 80mm shocks, which keeps the ride height the same as its original shocks. That is, of course, if you don't mind the slightly higher ride height, but that was not to my taste, so let's go with solution number two. RC4WD sells these washer spacers, as you can see here. These are made of metal, and they are M3 hole washer shims. These particular ones are 1mm thick, but you can get them in many different lengths, such as 2 or 3mm. They are usually used on the shock mounting points to correctly space your shocks away from the chassis body. All you have to do on the 70mm shocks is open up the shock and place the spacer inside the shock and then screw this part back on. What that's going to do is prevent the shock from bottoming out too much, and you can adjust where it bottoms out. And that will prevent the knocking. From my experimentation on the 70mm shocks, not these ones, the 70mm ones, 3 of these 1mm spacers was enough to stop the drive shaft banging into my transmission. Do bear in mind though, for each 1mm spacer you put in there, you lose about 1mm of travel. And since the 70mm shocks didn't have that much travel to begin with, you're going to be losing quite a lot of travel. But if you're on a budget and you want that low ride height, this might be an ideal option. And here I will demonstrate how to do this process and what the effects are. Here is the original travel on these 80mm shocks. I'm just using 80mm as an example. First you pop this open. Now, a word of warning, these are really tight on there, screwed on. You may have to use something to carefully remove this, or you could just use very strong hands, but they are very tough on there and quite hard to open at first. So you just pop one off. Let's say you want 2 spacers. Just pop them in the top there, like that. Put them over the spring. And carefully screw this back on without cross-threading it. And as you can see, when they bottom out, one of them is going to sit slightly higher than the other. And all you have to do is experiment using different amounts of washers or spacers until you get your desired height on full compression. A quick tip, if you're not actually buying anything from RC4WD Drive, you don't specifically have to go to the website to buy these spacers. These spacers are available anywhere. Many companies make them, not necessarily for this application, but this size of washer in metal is available online everywhere. And option number 3, you could get some new drive shafts. Now, the original ones were quite thick, quite wide here, and that's the reason it's knocking into it. Obviously, it has to be a lot wider because it is plastic. I blame the main culprits on these ear parts here. But many companies do upgrade drive shafts, and these ones here are from RC4WD Drive. They are known as their Punisher drive shafts. These ones are V2s, and if you install them on here, they are just about thin enough that they do not interfere with the transmission case, even when the suspension is completely bottomed out. Let's try and just put this on here like that. And let's have another look at the suspension bottoming out. And as you can see, even though I'm completely compressing it down, it will miss it. And here is a visual aid on the Punisher V2 drive shaft. So I'm about to change both my front and rear drive shaft to these Punisher V2s, and hopefully this information is going to help someone out there. Now let's get to a part where we give extra information. Now, when I first went online to look for drive shafts, I came across many different types of many different companies, all of which seemed to fit, but the main issue I was having was I needed these to be extra thin or not so thick, so they could remedy the problem that I was actually experiencing. I noticed that RC4WD Drive had many different drive shafts and decided to go for the V2 Punishers. So I went online and did some research and noticed that there were quite a few reviews regarding these Punisher V2s and stating that the pins fall out very easily. This made me a little reluctant to buy at first, but because of the price and the size, I decided to give it a go, and this can be an ongoing experiment from me. If these pins fall out, I'll change the description of this video, leave a pinned comment in the comment section, and let everyone know that the pins of these Punisher V2s fell out. At the moment, they seem fine. I have tried pressing them slightly with a tool and they seem pretty well in there. So hopefully I got lucky and these ones were absolutely fine. But I'll let you guys know. So I'm going to install these now. They are a lot weightier than the original plasticky metal drive shafts. They're a lot heavier. They're a lot more sturdy. Obviously being made from a steel they would be. Original RC4WD drive shaft, 27 grams. RC4WD Drive Punisher V2s, 46 grams. Let's see if both of them are. And they are. But if you look really closely inside, if it focuses, you might be able to see that even though these were new to me, they arrived with some rust within, so I'm probably going to have to try and clean that up later with something. But there we go, guys. That was today's video. Hopefully it's helped someone out there. And if it did, why not give us a like? Let us know that you liked the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. who have not upgraded their shocks and are about to, or decide who negative